In 1939, a small truck company in Seattle started building a machine that would move more freight, haul more timber, and cross more mountain passes than anything else on four wheels in America. It was called the Kenworth 521. Within a decade, it was everywhere west of the Mississippi. By 1958, it was gone, erased, replaced. The tooling scrapped. The men who built it reassigned or retired. The truck that built the American West got the same treatment the West gives everything it's done using. It got left behind. To understand why the 521 mattered, you have to understand what the American West looked like in the late 1930s. And what it looked like was empty. Brutally, impossibly, dangerously empty. Towns separated by hundreds of miles of nothing. Mountain passes that climbed to 10,000 feet and dropped back down the other side at grades that would make your stomach turn. Logging roads in the Pacific Northwest that weren't really roads at all, just muddy scars cut into the side of mountains where one wrong move sent you and your load tumbling into a ravine nobody would find for weeks. And desert stretches in the Southwest and Great Basin where the nearest mechanic might as well have been on the moon. Railroads served the big cities, the main corridors, the routes where enough tonnage moved to justify laying track. But the small towns, the logging camps, the mining operations, the cattle ranches spread across millions of acres of open range. They needed trucks, not just any trucks. They needed trucks that could climb a 6% grade for 6 miles straight with 40 tons behind them without the engine overheating. Trucks that could handle mud so deep it swallowed tires whole and keep pulling. Trucks that wouldn't break down 200 miles from the nearest parts depot, because out there, a breakdown didn't mean an inconvenience. It meant walking, possibly for days. In the western United States in the 1940s, your equipment either worked or you were in serious trouble. There was no in-between, no roadside assistance number to call, no service truck coming around the bend to bail you out. And in the late 30s, there wasn't much on the market that could handle these conditions. Most American manufacturers built trucks for the flatlands, for paved roads, for reasonable weather and moderate loads. Kenworth was not most manufacturers. Kenworth was born in the mud, literally. The company traced its roots back to 1912, when two brothers named Gerlinger started a car and truck dealership in Portland, Oregon. By 1914, they decided the trucks available from other companies weren't tough enough for the Pacific Northwest, so they started building their own. They called it the Gersix because it ran a 6-cylinder engine when most truck makers were still bolting in underpowered 4s. It had a steel frame, not wood. It was designed specifically for logging in the rugged mountains of Washington and Oregon, not adapted for logging after the fact, designed for it from the first bolt. That truck became popular with loggers almost immediately, and in 1916, the company relocated to Tacoma, Washington, where the logging industry was booming. A year later, a businessman named Edgar K. Worthington and his partner, Captain Frederick Kent, bought the company. Kent eventually retired, and his son Harry took his place. In January of 1923, they reincorporated as the Kenworth Motor Truck Company. The name was a contraction. Ken from Kent, Worth from Worthington. That first full year they sold 80 trucks. Every single one was custom built to the buyer's specifications. You didn't walk into a Kenworth dealer and pick one off the lot. That wasn't how it worked. You told them what you were hauling, how much it weighed, what roads you were driving, what mountains you had to cross, what weather you'd face. And they built it, 2 trucks a week, by hand, to specification. That philosophy would define Kenworth for decades. When the Great Depression hit and truck orders dried up, they didn't fold, they pivoted. Built custom fire trucks for individual fire departments, each one different, each one built to the specific needs of the station that ordered it. When World War II arrived, they converted to building M1 wreckers for the Army. 4-ton, 6x6 recovery vehicles designed to drag disabled tanks and trucks off battlefields. They built 1,930 of them by war's end. They also manufactured components for Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-29 Super Fortress bombers. The same hands that built custom logging trucks were suddenly building parts for the planes that would firebomb Tokyo. When the war ended, those hands went back to building trucks. And it's that philosophy, that willingness to build whatever was needed, however it was needed, that produced the 500 series in 1939 and kept refining it through the 40s and into the 50s. The 521 was the workhorse of that lineup, a two-axle 4x2 conventional cab truck. Its siblings were the 523, a 6x4 tandem axle version built for heavier loads, and the 524, a 6x2. But the 521 was the one you saw everywhere, on mountain highways and desert straightaways and Forest Service roads, hauling fuel and general freight and livestock through terrain that would chew up and spit out anything designed by engineers who'd never left the flatlands. The 521's edge over the competition came down to one word: overbuilt. Kenworth didn't engineer to a price point. They engineered to survive. The frame rails were heavier than anything the competition offered. The cooling systems were deliberately oversized because Kenworth's engineers had actually driven those mountain roads themselves, watched the temperature gauge creep up on a long loaded grade in August, and understood exactly what happened when cooling capacity ran short. The radiators were bigger than they needed to be. The mounting hardware was heavier. Everything had margin built in. Where other companies designed for adequate, Kenworth designed for brutal. And the company had earned the right to charge a premium. In 1933, Kenworth became the first American truck manufacturer to install diesel engines as standard equipment across its lineup. Gasoline engines had been the norm, but diesel fuel cost a third the price. That same year, they introduced the first factory-produced sleeper cab. Two industry firsts in a single year, both driven by what customers in the field actually needed. Diesel was cheaper per mile. Sleepers meant a driver could haul a long route without wasting money on motels. Practical answers to practical problems from people who understood the work. Now, the engines. This is where the 521 story gets genuinely wild. In the 40s and 50s, most truck manufacturers were running diesel engines that produced somewhere around 150 horsepower, adequate on flat ground, miserable in the mountains. On a long grade, fully loaded, those diesels would slow to a crawl, 10 miles an hour, 8, 5. Trucks stacking up behind each other on two-lane mountain highways, everyone overheating, everyone late, everyone cursing. Kenworth offered those diesels too. Cummins units, mostly. Reliable. Proven. Economical on the flat. But Kenworth also offered something almost nobody else would touch: Hall-Scott gasoline engines. Hall-Scott was a company out of Berkeley, California, and they built the most powerful truck engines in America. Period. Nobody was close. The 400 series was their masterpiece. An overhead cam Hemi-head inline six-cylinder engine, available with either 855 or 1,091 cubic inches of displacement. 1,091 cubic inches from a 6. That bigger version produced up to 325 horsepower and 1,000 pound-feet of torque. Running on butane, which is liquefied petroleum gas, in the late 1940s, when the best diesel on the market was making maybe 150, 325 horsepower. More than double the competition, from a naturally aspirated gasoline engine with overhead cams and hemispherical combustion chambers at a time when most truck power plants were flathead designs barely more sophisticated than what your grandfather had in his farm tractor. The Hall-Scott 400 series was a genuine engineering masterpiece hiding under the hood of a work truck. And in a Kenworth 521, it turned a loaded mountain climb from a 2-hour crawl into a 20-minute run at highway speed. The difference wasn't incremental, it was transformational. These engines sounded like nothing else on the road. a deep, rolling, mechanical thunder that you could hear approaching from a mile out on a mountain grade. Drivers who ran Hall Scotts never forgot that sound. It was the sound of passing every other truck on the climb, loaded. The sound of arriving on schedule when the diesel guys were an hour behind because they couldn't maintain speed. Old-timers describe it with something close to reverence. The way those big sixes would settle into a rhythm under load, exhaust note deepening, pulling hard mile after mile while everyone else faded in the mirrors. There are recordings of Hall Scott engines in old Kenworth fire engines that give you a taste. They sound like mechanical lions, except these particular lions weighed several tons and drank butane like water. And then there was the V12. One owner-operator out of Elgin, Oregon, a small town tucked into the northeast corner of the state near the Blue Mountains, wanted to haul petroleum products over Cabbage Hill at full highway speed. Cabbage Hill is the stretch of what is now Interstate 84 between Pendleton and La Grande. 6 miles, 6% grade. In the 50s, the old highway was longer and steeper than the modern interstate version. This man wanted to pass buses going uphill, loaded, with a full tank trailer behind him. So he asked Kenworth to build him something custom. They installed a Hall Scott Defender V12, essentially 2 of those massive 1,091 cubic inch sixes sharing a single crankcase, 2,181 cubic inches of total displacement, 600 horsepower. In roughly 1951, the most powerful truck engine ever installed in a factory-built highway rig at that time. Kenworth had to stretch the hood by a foot just to fit the thing. Photos from the delivery show the happy owner grinning in the cab alongside a Hall Scott field representative and a Kenworth salesman. Everyone's smiling. Nobody knows yet what's coming. What came was this. The truck demolished mountain grades like they didn't exist, past everything on the road, loaded semis and passenger cars alike. You can only imagine the blue flame shooting from those exhaust stacks at full throttle, roaring up the grade with a tank trailer swaying behind it. But the engine was eventually destroked to 1,870 cubic inches and derated to 450 horsepower because no driveline components available at the time could survive the full torque output. And eventually the truck caught fire, literally burned. Too much heat generation, too much fuel flowing through too small fuel lines, too hot to handle. But Kenworth built it anyway because their customer asked, and in the 521 era, that was reason enough. You asked, they built. Even if what you asked for was borderline insane. Meanwhile, 521s and their 500 series siblings were working across an absurd range of conditions around the world. In Mexico, they were fitted with oversized radiators and hauled freight out of Monterrey across 1,000 miles of unpredictable terrain. Desert heat one stretch, mountain cold the next, roads that changed character every 50 miles. In Alaska, Kenworth 500 series trucks hauled 13,000 board feet of timber per load. That is 160,000 pounds gross vehicle weight on roads that barely qualified as paths, in temperatures that could freeze diesel fuel solid in the lines. In the Pacific Northwest, these trucks didn't just participate in the logging industry, they were the logging industry. The old-growth forests of Washington and Oregon were being harvested at enormous scale during the post-war boom, and every single log came down those mountains on a truck. The big timber companies ran fleets of 500 series Kenworths. So did the independent operators, the one-truck guys who contracted out load by load. The Model 524, the 6x2, was particularly popular for log hauling because its single-drive rear axle saved weight, letting you carry more timber per load before hitting the legal gross weight limit. Every pound you saved on the truck was a pound more of logs you could haul. And at the prices old-growth Douglas fir was fetching in the post-war building boom, those extra pounds mattered. Kenworth's engineers had a saying that became a company motto. Kenworth engineers wear muddy boots. They went into the field. They drove the same roads their customers drove. They stood in the rain on a landing watching their trucks get loaded, measuring frame flex and checking suspension travel under real conditions. They watched their trucks work and fail and work again, and they brought every lesson back to the factory in Seattle. The result was a truck that understood its job because the people who designed it understood the job. There's a reason the 521 earned the loyalty it did. The men who drove these trucks trusted them with their lives on roads where trust wasn't a figure of speech. In 1948, Kenworth added the Bullnose cabover to the 500 series, and it became an icon. The name came from the rounded front end that gave it an almost pugnacious, squared-off look, like a boxer squaring up. The cab sat directly over the engine, but, critically, it did not tilt. It was bolted to the frame, rigid and immovable. You wanted to service the engine? Crawl underneath or pull up the cab floorboards and reach down past your own feet. Not elegant. But the cab didn't need to be elegant. It needed to be indestructible. The design came from a specific request. A California trucking company asked for a cab sturdy enough to be lifted completely off the truck and set directly on a shop floor with no supports, no jack stands, no bracing of any kind. In those days, engine swaps in cabovers often required removing the entire cab. Most cabover cabs were built on wood frames with thin sheet metal panels. They were fragile, and removing them without damage was a delicate operation, requiring stands and braces at every mounting point. The Kenworth Bullnose was heavy-gauge steel throughout. The sleeper version weighed close to 2,000 pounds, just the cab alone. You could pull it off the truck, set it down on its own fender skirts, and walk away. It sat there like a small steel bunker. No supports needed, no drama. The Bullnose was available as a day cab or sleeper, and the 521 became the 4x2 variant that Pacific Freight Lines and dozens of independent operators used all across the West. By 1950, Kenworth had over 30 models operating in most states west of the Mississippi. Foreign sales accounted for 40% of all revenue, with distribution reaching 27 countries. The Model 888, the super heavy logging variant, was rated at a staggering 110,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. We do deep dives like this every week. Now, where were we? Then the world changed. And the 521 didn't change with it. That was the beginning of the end. In 1945, Pacific Car and Foundry Company, a steel and railroad equipment manufacturer based in Renton, Washington, purchased Kenworth outright. Pacific Car was founded by William Pigott in 1905 to manufacture railroad cars and industrial castings. During the war, they built tanks, including the massive M26 Pershing, a serious industrial company with serious resources. Kenworth's president Phil Johnson had died in '44, and the surviving owners, his wife and Harry Kent's widow, weren't interested in running a truck company. Pacific Car had the capital, Kenworth had the products, and the deal closed. At first, it seemed like a good match. Kenworth moved to a bigger factory in South Seattle in '46. 27 new models came out in 5 years. But Paul Pigott, William's son, had ambitions that stretched far past the Pacific Northwest. He wanted Kenworth to be a national player. National players need standardized products, predictable production, economies of scale. You don't build a national brand selling custom trucks one at a time to individual loggers who need a specific axle ratio for a specific mountain road. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 was the final blow. Congress authorized $25 billion for 41,000 miles of interstate highway. 90% federally funded, smooth, wide, multi-lane divided highways connecting every major city in America. Before the interstates, trucking was regional, mountain trucks for mountain country, desert trucks for desert country. The 521 was built for specific punishing conditions, but the interstates were about to make trucking national, and national meant standard. In '56, Pacific Car made two decisive moves. They reclassified Kenworth from independent subsidiary to corporate division. A subsidiary has its own identity and leadership. A division takes orders. And they launched the 900 series with a new drop-frame chassis designed for larger radiators and the newer, more powerful diesel engines that were finally catching up to the old Hall Scotts. The conventional cab was redesigned. The Bullnose cabover was retired. The 500 series was done, all of it. 17 years of production. Finished. The last Bullnoses rolled off the line in '58, fitted with the quad headlights that had just become legal that year. The cab dies were worn through. Nobody replaced them. That same year, Pacific Car acquired Peterbilt. Paul Paccar was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 1960 and died in '61. That year, the W900 debuted with a completely redesigned cab alongside the K100 cabover, named W for Worthington, K for Kent, for a respectful nod to the founders. But the company those founders had built, the one that custom-designed trucks for customers who needed specific solutions, that company was already gone. The W900 became a legend on its own terms. Over 60 years of continuous production. The longest-running truck model in Class 8 history, it appeared in films and TV shows. It became the truck that every owner-operator dreamed about, a genuine icon. So this isn't a story about a good truck replaced by a bad one. The W900 was excellent. It's a story about a philosophy being replaced by a business model. By 1972, Pacific Car had reorganized as Paccar Incorporated, a Delaware holding company, and Paccar operated unlike any other truck manufacturer in the business. They maintained virtually no manufacturing facilities of their own. Kenworth and Peterbilt trucks were assembled from components supplied by Eaton, Rockwell International, Cummins, Caterpillar, and others. Paccar bought parts, assembled trucks, sold trucks. Financially brilliant, no massive factory overhead, easy to scale back in downturns without laying off thousands of factory workers. Freedom to offer customers different engine and transmission combinations by mixing and matching supplier catalogs. By the mid-1980s, Paccar held about 18% of the Class 8 market, and that share was under pressure from Freightliner, a Daimler subsidiary that was eating into their territory with aggressive pricing. Paccar responded by closing the Kenworth assembly plant in Kansas City in April of '86. The company that once built trucks by hand, 2 a week, was now closing factories because a German conglomerate was undercutting them on price. The irony would have made Kent and Worthington wince, but the business model worked. Paccar survived every downturn, every recession, every shift in the market. By the late 1990s, they were posting sales of nearly $7 billion a year. By 2024, that number was over $33 billion. But the truck itself was no longer a unified machine conceived and built from the ground up. The engine wasn't Kenworth's. The transmission wasn't Kenworth's. The axles, the brakes, the electrical system, none of it. What was Kenworth's was the cab, the frame layout, the badge, and a reputation built by trucks like the 521 that most customers had already forgotten existed. The men who remembered those trucks, who'd driven them or ridden in the cab with their fathers on a logging run through the Cascades, they were getting older. Their stories were becoming history. And history doesn't show up on a balance sheet. In the 521 era, Kenworth would build a truck around a specific route. The engineer sizing your cooling system knew whether you were running Cabbage Hill or the Grapevine or the Donner Pass approach. He knew the altitude, the typical ambient temperature in August, the gross weight you'd be carrying, and how long the grade lasted. He sized the radiator accordingly, not from a catalog, from knowledge. That level of specificity produced trucks that were precisely matched to their work in a way that no standardized product could replicate. But it also produced trucks slowly, expensively, and in numbers too small to build a global corporation around. The irony of the whole story is almost too clean to be real. The freight those 521s hauled built the post-war economy. The economy demanded highways. The highways demanded standardized trucks. The standardized trucks rendered the 521 obsolete. It built the very infrastructure that killed it, and now the cycle is completing itself one final time. In early 2025, Kenworth confirmed what the industry had expected. The W900 is being discontinued, the T800 wide hood as well, and the C500, the extreme-duty truck, descended from the same lineage. Emission standards for 2027 model year trucks demand technology that the W900's decades-old cab architecture cannot accommodate. Kenworth is producing a legacy edition. 1,000 trucks with vintage design elements, a hood badge borrowed from the popular 1966 styling, platinum accent stitching, heritage tuck-and-roll upholstery in the sleeper. Then it ends. The surviving 521s are scattered across the country. A handful sit in museums. A few remain in private collections owned by people who understand exactly what they have and what it represents. One famous example was rescued from a scrapyard in Wichita for $300, carefully restored and put back to work hauling cattle through the 70s. It changed hands to a buyer in New Mexico in '84. Decades later, when that buyer passed away, the original owner's family bought it back. They found the truck in the same condition it was in 40 years earlier. Still solid, still intact, still ready. Because Kenworth built it that way, the drivers who remember the 521 era are fewer every year. The mechanics who could service a Hall-Scott 6 by feel and sound. The dispatchers who knew which trucks could handle which grades in which weather. That entire generation of Western trucking is passing. The sound of a Hall-Scott winding up on Cabbage Hill exists only in a few old recordings and the fading memories of men in their 80s and 90s. There is something honest about the Kenworth 521 that is difficult to find in modern commercial vehicles. It wasn't designed to perform well in a marketing presentation. It wasn't optimized for shareholder returns or fleet acquisition programs. It wasn't a collection of other companies' components arranged beneath a famous nameplate. It was a truck designed from the ground up by engineers who understood the work, for operators who did the work. Steel and horsepower and muddy boots. Nothing more, nothing less. It got a load over a mountain and brought the driver home, and for 17 years, that was enough. The truck that built the West was abandoned by the West it built. And now, nearly 7 decades after the last 500 series left the factory, the final echo of that entire era is going quiet too. And there you have it. The Kenworth 521, a truck most people have never heard of that helped build the country they drive across every day. If your family ran one back in the day, or you've ever spotted one sitting in a field somewhere out west, drop it in the comments. And if you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe. More coming soon.